To nobody's surprise, rogues are in a great spot right now. They are absolute chart toppers capable of doing top tier DPS. You could simply just be satisfied by that, but no, not you. Well, certainly not me. I do know more. Like, exactly how close is combat to Assassination? It was widely assumed that combat will eventually be the higher DPS spec. Is that going to be the case at the end of Phase 2 in full Ulduar BIS? Current sims say not quite, but how accurate are the sims? Well, we're about to find out. I say sims, but what I really mean is this spreadsheet here. There is a sim, and from my understanding they produce similar results, but I haven't touched it, so we'll stick to the sheet. The creator of this sheet is Simonize, probably the most trustworthy classic rogue source out there. If you're watching this video, then more than likely you probably already follow him, but if you don't, then you should. Now, I'm not here to tear up his work, and in fact, it could be 100% accurate. What I am here to do is take real in-game data and compare this with the sheet-generated numbers to give an accurate projection of top-tier rogue play at the end of Phase 2. I say top-tier because sheets and sims pretty much always attempt to account for perfect play and zero latency. So, at the end of Phase 1, I grabbed all the top parses for Assassination and combat from Patchwork. This is a stand-in DPS fight with 100 DPS uptime, and all of these rogues are pretty much full BIS because gear in Phase 1 was easy. Patchwork is also single target. Naturally, if there are more targets or less uptime, then DPS numbers will vary. The number one determinant of total DPS, especially in Phase 1, is total fight length, so I plotted these DPS numbers against fight length on a graph, then I plotted the expected DPS numbers from the sims on the same graph. Let's start with combat. Here's the overall data collected. Keep in mind this is the highest 1 to 2% of all parses. At first glance, you might just notice lots of these dots being underneath the curve. But that's to be expected. It expects perfect play, remember? What's more notable is the number of data points that are on the line or slightly above. That's a good sign. The warrior analysis didn't have a single point reach the curve. Even parses that didn't have the highest overall DPS number are able to reach the expected amount with longer kill times. Let's visit the very top parses. These are the absolutely highest numbers achieved by combat rogues in Phase 1. There is some slight variation, but these numbers come very close to the expected amount. A calculation for the highest parses has it at an overreport of only 0.13 to 0.26%. That's so small that it's pretty much within the margin of error. That means the absolute highest parses, and the 99.9%ers, should expect to match spreadsheet estimates. If you remember the larger graph, you'll see that even longer kill times and lower overall DPS are capable of reaching the spreadsheet output. So what does this mean? If you think this implies that the combat sheet is 100% accurate, then I'd probably agree to an extent. It's basically perfect at the very high end of the curve when it comes to RNG. A large portion of these data points are below the curve. Obviously latency and skill are a factor here, but a huge part of this is in fact RNG. Notably combat potency procs for extra energy. What you're likely seeing is at the top end of the bell curve and energy gained due to that talent. Okay, so let's do the more representative of the two spec, Assassination. This graph is much different than combat or anything else up until now. This is the top few percent for mutilate rogues, and sure, there are some points beneath the curve, but there are a huge amount above it as well, like significantly above it. Let's try to make a little sense of this and get some more information and narrow down this graph to the top 10 and 25 parses in Phase 1. This is pretty expected after seeing the previous graph, and pretty much all points are over the spreadsheet DPS curve. After doing a little math on it, this looks like a potential underreport of more than 2%, which could be over 200 DPS in Phase 1. Does this mean Assassination is doing more damage than expected? Well, yes. But again, keep in mind this underreport is looking at the very high end of the RNG element. If you're very lucky, and skilled, of course, and geared, then you can reach this amount. Even if you are all of these things except lucky, then you're going to do less than this amount. But wait, it's underreporting, so if your luck is average, like most people would be, then you should expect to see numbers closer to the spreadsheet estimate. If you play Assassination regularly, then it's probably pretty easy to see why the super high-end parses can hit such high numbers with a bit of luck. The RNG element to the spec is probably one of my biggest gripes with it. Getting really consistent Ruthlessness and Seal Fate procs can enable you to keep up in Venom almost endlessly. Then there are just some pulls where you can't get a proc to save your life, and your Venom uptime drops off a cliff, which is such a huge DPS loss. We've pretty much established that combat estimates are really great for very high-end parses, and Assassination estimates are not the best for the top end, but are great for consistency. So, how much damage will you actually do in full Ulduar BIS at the end of the phase? You're looking to push damage, so how much is each spec truly capable of doing at the high end? For Alliance Rogues, the previous sim estimated DPS totals for 3-minute and 2-minute encounters are shown here. High numbers, for sure, and a difference of 434 DPS with Assassination higher than combat on 3-minute fights. But we've already determined that Mutilate Rogues are actually capable of higher DPS, so let's make the adjustments to estimate the absolute max DPS numbers. A whopping 11k for Assassination, with combat still looking great at about 10.4. That leaves a 600 DPS gap between the two specs at the top of the charts. A little high for the combat truthers, but if you take it down to just 98 or 99.0 parses, it's likely you'll see a 400 DPS gap instead. Keep in mind, none of this includes exposed armor, and if you're playing combat, solid chance you're exposing without one of those warrior types sundering for you. This also does not mean combat is useless, it's just a different type of raid utility since it provides the 4% physical damage buff that is only provided by an arms warrior or otherwise. Sims and spreadsheets provide a great way to compare the differences between individual pieces of gear in different setups. That's their main use compared to the total DPS number it gives you, not a number I typically trust for any class or spec. In this case, however, those numbers are pretty dang accurate just for different reasons. So, now that we've established just how much damage the two DPS specs for Rogues are going to do at the end of Phase 2 heading into Trial of the Crusader, and Warriors in a previous video that I've linked in the description, I've set us up for a few questions to be answered. How many Rogues or Warriors should you actually bring? Rogue damage is really high, should you even bring Warriors? What about an Arms Warrior? Maybe it's worth bringing them if they Sunder. Speaking of, which spec should Sunder or Expose? Who has scaled the most out of the group, and what is the most optimal comp for the highest raid DPS? All of that and more in the probably too detailed upcoming Rogue vs Warrior video. That's it. If you have any questions, drop them below in the comments or come by on Twitch, link below in the description to catch me live. If you like the sort of content and want to help support this channel, be sure to like this video and subscribe. Thanks for watching and see you next time.